I'm with good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Heather Page. I'm with UN Statistics Division. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 67th session of the Commission on the Status of Women side event that we're hosting today on achieving sustainable development goals through a gender lens, challenges and opportunities. And I'm joined today with our colleagues from UNWomen, from the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, and also Vital Voices. And I would just like to welcome you all to this side event where we will present on the joint publication that's developed by UNWomen and UNSD on the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot 2022 report, which part of its data are getting quite a few headlines lately. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that from Jeanette. And in this report, it emphasizes the data and indicators available and needed from monitoring the SDGs from a gender perspective, as well as the data gaps. And the event will also feature presentations from stakeholders on innovation and technology change, including from WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, on a data set on patent applications by sex, as well as on gender-based violence and digital inclusivity from Vital Voices. And following the presentations, we will have a short Q&A. So in order to keep us on time, we're going to just jump right in to our presentations. And I'd like to first welcome Jeanette Azcona, who is a senior research and data policy specialist at UNWomen, who will be presenting on the Gender Snapshot 2022. So I will hand the floor over to you. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you so much, Heather. Let me share my screen. Give me one moment while I do that. And then start the slideshow. So hopefully you're able to see the slideshow.
Not quite in. Okay, now yep, we're good. Thank you.
It takes a moment. Great, thank you. Well, then I'll get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. One of the kind of, pluses of doing these kind of remote events is that we can bring people together from different time zones. And so we want to make sure that we're welcoming everyone from wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted to be here today to present to you the findings of our 4th edition of the annual publication Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Gender Snapshot. Each year, the report brings together the latest available evidence on gender equality and women's empowerment across all 17 goals, highlighting progress made since 2015, but also the most recent setbacks. This year's analysis shows that the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath continue to impact the well-being of women and girls. And the rise in conflict and backlash against women's sexual and reproductive health and rights are further diminishing the outlook for gender equality. At the current rate of progress, the achievement of all SDG 5 targets may take decades and even centuries to materialize. And so unfortunately not the most positive outlook, but definitely something that is important to raise awareness and to take action. Gender equality is a foundation for achieving all SDGs, and it should be at the heart of our efforts to accelerate progress on all the Sustainable Development Goals. Put simply, the SDGs will not be achieved without ensuring the well-being of women and girls. But we cannot develop the types of policies, programs, and plans of action needed to address these challenges without first knowing how they are impacting women and their lives. So my aim with this presentation today is to show you the distance to equal, which indeed is quite long, and with only 8 years remaining to achieve the SDGs, again, emphasizing and re-emphasizing that the time to act is now, and encouraging policymakers who may be on the call today with us to join us in accelerating progress through concrete action. Before I jump into the findings from this year's report, let me quickly give you some background on this publication. As I mentioned, the snapshot is done in collaboration with the UN Statistical Division. Heather, who is our moderator, is one of the co-authors. The report is produced annually and is the only report within the UN system to take a gendered approach to the assessment of progress across all of the SDGs, so all 17. Apart from this publication, we also publish papers as part of our Spotlight on the SDGs background paper series, where each paper reviews a particular goal, so one out of the 17 goals, and showcases how multi-level data disaggregated by sex, by age, and other relevant characteristics can help us in identifying gender gaps and inequalities among groups of women and girls and subgroups of women and girls. I'll leave you with some links at the end of the presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to take a deeper dive into those publications and be able to kind of review some of the material that I won't have time to cover in today's presentation. Okay, so with that, let's dive into the report's findings. And so as I said, we have storylines for each of the goals. I'm only going to give you some highlights on what we've covered in each. For goal 1, which aims to eradicate extreme poverty around the world, we find that women and girls are facing acute challenges. By the end of 2022, around 383 million women and girls were living in extreme poverty. So that is living on less than $1.90 a day, compared to 368 million men and boys. The projections suggest that if current trends continue as they are, in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, more women and girls will live in extreme poverty by 2030 than they do today. We also looked at poverty at different thresholds. So looking at the $3.20 a day, $5.50 a day, and the findings on women facing greater exposure to poverty were similar. And so again, not the best outlook there, but really emphasizing the gendered impact of poverty around the world. Countries have barely had a chance to recover from the pandemic before the war in Ukraine erupted, limiting supplies of wheat, fertilizer, and fuel, and propelling inflation globally. As a result, many women and girls are going hungry. Currently, 1.7 billion women and girls lack sufficient income to meet their basic needs, such as food, clothing, and adequate shelter. The gender gap in food security, already biased against women, increased from nearly 2% to over 4 percentage points, rather, between 2019 and 2021. So not only are there a larger number of folks facing food insecurity, but the gap between men and women is also increasing, with women being biased in that gap. Under goal 3, devastated health systems have left poor women without care and in worse physical and mental health. In addition, legal restrictions, including the criminalization of abortion, continue to compound the challenges women face in accessing safe sexual and reproductive health care. Today, over 1.2 billion women and girls of reproductive age live in countries and areas with some restriction on access to safe abortions. It goes without saying that the response to the ongoing health crisis must include prioritizing sexual and reproductive health services for women and girls, but unfortunately not enough attention has been placed on protecting women's health. The result is increased maternal mortality and a decrease in life expectancy, as seen in many countries. Over 2 years into the pandemic, schools around the world have largely reopened, but sizable impacts on girls' education and learning remain. Protracted conflict, wars, and a renewal effort to keep girls out of school perpetuate gender gaps in access to school and learning. Nearly 130 million women and 130 million girls are out of school globally. Increase in adolescent pregnancy during COVID-19 also is a threat to girls' education. A study done in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and the United Republic of Tanzania found that 56% of adolescent girls from hard-to-reach populations had dropped out of school. Many were currently or recently pregnant, and so a correlation there with lower health outcomes and higher adolescent fertility. Under Goal 5, which is, of course, a standalone goal on achieving gender equality, we're seeing that at the current rate of progress, it will take as much as 286 years to close the gap in legal protection and remove discriminatory laws. We know these things change very slowly, but of course, this very, very slow pace is not good enough. We're seeing a similarly slow rate of change across other areas. 140 years is estimated for women to be represented equally in the workplace in terms of workplace leadership, access to managerial positions and things of that sort, and at least 40 years to achieve equal representation in national parliament. To end child marriage by 2030, for example, progress must be accelerated 17 times. So 17 times faster than in the last decade. And so again, COVID-19 has disrupted progress. Before that, we had seen progress in many of these issues, but again, not at the rate that, that we need to achieve the goal by 2030. The pandemic, COVID-19, has also had an impact on women's unpaid care and domestic work. An estimated 512 billion additional hours of unpaid care, unpaid childcare globally is estimated for women when schools were closed, etc. But nearly 60% of countries did not take any measures to support increases in unpaid care work during the pandemic. And so, again, kind of a lack of policy action in these areas. Increases in in people's access to safe water is really essential for human progress, but we're seeing water stress intensifying across countries, across regions. This is increasingly in the news and in people's minds, and of course, it's taking a toll on women's health, on women's time and their lives. More than 733 million people live in a context of high and critical water stress, where demand for safe, usable water outstrips supply. Where access is severely limited, women and girls must often walk long distances to collect water for their families. And so women traditionally are the ones who bear the responsibility of doing so. And of course, that responsibility becomes even more time consuming as water stress intensifies. In Iraq, for example, where high water stress is a reality in many parts of the country, and where 30% of the population are rural and have no improved drinking water on premise, women spend up to 3 hours per day collecting water, to give you an illustrative example of the challenges. The majority of women and girls without clean and affordable energy reside in 3 regions of the world. And so under Goal 7, of course, the focus is on affordable and clean energy. And so the regions most impacted by this gap are Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, and Southeastern Asia. More than half are in fragile and conflict-affected countries. We know that electrification can reduce women's time spent on unpaid domestic work, and can increase women's decision-making and ability to engage in paid activities outside of the home. But the gap in access to clean energy remains large. Apart from the impact on time and time poverty, not having access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy can also affect women's health and access to quality healthcare. One of the things that we highlighted in this year's storyline for Goal 7 was the continued gap in access to energy, to electricity in hospitals in many parts of the world, and the impact, of course, that has on health outcomes. In South Sudan, for example, where the maternal mortality ratio is over 1,000 per 100,000 live births, women often give birth by candlelight when the generators fail, when power outages are occurring and often are routine, that is kind of the reality, right, that they have to live through. And so again, showing kind of the linkages between these goals and the deprivations and kind of challenges that women and girls are facing in many parts of the world. Fewer working hours, lower pay, and unfair burdens of unpaid care all are kind of contributing factors to women's lower prospects in the labor market. But we know that we can make changes here. There are different policies that can actually make a huge difference in expanding women's access to decent work, right? So it's not about just having jobs, but having quality jobs that improve their living standards. And so here, to kind of give you some examples, more is needed to promote and guarantee decent work for all. More labor laws and labor reforms that address key barriers, including those related to discrimination and harassment in the workplace. And of course, access to affordable and quality childcare. Oftentimes, the biggest barriers that women face have to do with the inequality in the home in terms of the distribution of unpaid care. And so addressing that is really important. Under Goal 9, which of course is especially timely given this year's CSW, we look, of course, at the evaluation of Goal 9 from a gender perspective. And here, what we highlighted is that, of course, globally, women remain underrepresented. They only hold 2 in every 10 science, engineering, and information and communication technology jobs. At the 20 largest global technology companies, women hold only 1 in 4 leadership positions. Women inventors make up only 16.5 of inventors listed on international patent applications globally. Bringing women and other marginalized groups into technology results in more creative solutions and has a greater potential for innovations that meet women's needs and promote gender equality. So this is a no-brainer. We're going to hear more about this from our WIPO colleague, but again, an area that is the focus of this year's CSW, and again, an area where we don't see enough progress and a lot of inequality when we compare women's outcomes with men's. For Goal 10, we focused on refugees this year. Each edition of the report takes a different angle. I think last year we looked at those with migrant status and the impact that they're facing. Here we focused on refugees and the fact that these numbers are unfortunately increasing. By the end of 2020, 26.4 million people had fled their countries and become refugees, the highest level ever recorded. And of course, half are women and girls.
Jeanette, we have about 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay. Then I'm going to skip so I can get to Goal 5 again, because we wanted to show you that overview. But for Goal 11 is really bringing attention to the fact that, of course, urban spaces could be a place of really, positive outcomes for women and girls, of more opportunities, etc. But oftentimes women are overly represented among those facing acute deprivations in urban settings, overrepresented in those living in slums and slum-like settings, and of course, something that we wanted to bring visibility to. Climate change continues, of course, to have visible effects everywhere, with extreme weather events becoming more frequent and intense. Women, especially those from poor and marginalized communities, are disproportionately affected by climate change and the destruction of Earth's natural resources. And so something, of course, that we highlight in every edition of the report, we're actually going to have a spotlight paper focused exclusively on water issues coming out very soon. So keep a lookout for that. But we'll touch, of course, on climate change and the impact on women and girls. Equal representation is a goal and a conduit for more just and peaceful societies. And so here we focused on the fact that women are chronically underrepresented in leadership positions, including in conflict-affected countries where oftentimes they are very severely underrepresented, more so than the global average. And then for goal 17, we see that the allocations to programs where gender equality is a main objective continues to be dismal at 4.6%. Another key area of focus in the report this year was on the fact that the funding going to gender equality initiatives needs to be sustained, right? That the erratic nature of this funding is part of the problem, right? So not only increasing the funding, but making sure that we sustain it over time. To combat what I think hopefully will come out very clearly in what I've said so far, which is a reality of really not just one conflict, but multiple kind of interlinked challenges rather. So combating these different challenges that of course impact women really requires significant investments and investments that have a long-term trajectory and not kind of siloed or short-term. In terms of what we are doing with our monitoring of SDG 5, we are kind of putting together in the annex of the report a tracker that looks at all of the indicators and sub-indicators under Goal 5 and tries to assess where countries are, whether they're achieving the target, are on track to achieve the target, and where the gaps are. The first key finding from this is that there still remains massive data gaps. Only 47% of data required to track progress on SDG 5 are currently available. The second is that progress has not been large enough or fast enough to meet the targets by 2030. I'll give you just one example. Based on available data, 28% of the SDG 5 indicators and sub-indicators are far or very far from target. Only 12% are at target met or almost met. So to summarize, the report shows that women and girls and other vulnerable populations are bearing the brunt of the devastating social and economic fallout. Women and girls are struggling against a disproportionate share of job losses, increased care at home, derailing school, and intensifying risk of domestic violence and other forms of exploitation. We need more investments in women and girls and more investments in gathering timely, high quality, and disaggregated data. We need to acknowledge that the challenges are large. Centuries of discrimination are not going to disappear overnight. We need a sustained commitment to gender equality. So as I said, these are the annexes that give you kind of that kind of traffic light system, if you will, of which regions are where they are in terms of progress, and here the really quite visible the gaps that we have, particularly in terms of monitoring trend and monitoring progress over time across many of these indicators. I'm going to leave you here with some other additional resources. We're of course going to be sharing the PowerPoints from all of the panelists via email at the end of this meeting. So you can also click on those links once you have the PowerPoint in hand. Thank you so much, and hopefully, Heather, I was able to wrap up in the 2 minutes that I had remaining. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. It's really tricky to get 17 goals summary in a tiny time period, so I get it. I actually didn't want to stop you at all. Thank you so much for that summary. We've actually started getting quite a few really interesting questions, in particular related to the report. So I would ask actually if we can maybe start to answer some of those in the chat, in the Q&A as we're going on. Just so that way we have an opportunity to answer those questions. So I'd like to move on to our next presentation on women in innovation and patenting from Miss Elodie Carpentier, who is a research fellow at the Department for Economics and Data Analysis of the World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva. And she is on a joint fellowship with Invent Together. So Elodie, I will pass this to you, and I'll pop back on with about a minute or two left to let you know that time is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are focusing, as you may expect, on the SDG number 9, women in innovation occupation, and more specifically, women in patenting. So I'm going to give you some, I'm going to try to stick on time. I'm going to start by explaining the different strategy that we adopted and the tools that we developed to be able to measure the IP gender gap. And then I will present the recent trends in women participation in global patenting. And then I will close by pointing the next related step in our research agenda. So what we did, we started by collecting the almost 4 million PCT patent application, international patent application, that were filed all over the world since 1999 and until 2020. And then the first question we faced was, how do we find the gender of inventors? There are different strategies that can be adopted, all of which are very well explained in the guidelines that you can see here that we published in 6 languages. And in a nutshell, the 3 different strategies are the following. One is to use the tax identifier or the social security number when some countries collect them directly on the patent application, like Chile, for instance, did, which is not available for PCT application. Another direct approach is to add a checkbox to collect the gender of inventors directly from the patent application. Again, that's the ideal strategy along with the first one, but it cannot be applied retroactively. So we cannot do it for the past years. And the third, more indirect strategy is to infer the gender from the name and location of inventors. And that's the one we adopted in this study with all the limitation it involves. So we used the World Gender Name Dictionary. That's a tool that our team developed several years ago and updated 2 years ago. It includes the likely gender of more than 26 million names from 195 countries and territories over the world. And it also includes the name in their original character, which is crucially important for improving the coverage in Asian countries, for instance. So with this dictionary, we managed to predict the gender of 96% of all PCT patent inventors, summing up to 7.6 million inventors and almost 3 million patents. And once we had the data on the patent inventor, their gender, their location, and so on, the next question we faced was, which metric should we use to measure women's participation in patenting? After reviewing the work on the topic, it turns out that there are basically 3 key options. The first one is the one that most prior studies used. It's ATL, the share of patent with at least one woman as inventor. So it is just counting the number of patents with at least one woman and dividing by the total number of patents. It is very popular, but it's not useful in terms of setting policy targets. For instance, which proportion of patents should be including women, knowing that 96% of patents include men? And is a patent filed by 9 men and 1 woman comparable to a patent filed by a single woman? This is where the second metric, the woman inventor rate, entered the scene. It consists of counting the number of women listed on patent and dividing by the total number of inventors. And this way we can set a target, for instance, to 50% of women among inventors. So that's the one we're using in this presentation. And the third metric, which is not so common, it's women's share of total patenting. So it allows to measure the volume of patent that we could rightly attribute to women based on their representation in teams. So it's computing the WIR at the patent level and then summing the shares. So a patent with 2 inventors, one is a man, one is a woman, would credit women half a patent. And another patent with just 2 women would credit women 1 full patent. So let's have a look at these 3 metrics over time. The first finding that we have here is that women were involved in the invention behind only 23% of all application in the whole period, while men were involved in 96% of them. In the latest year, they were involved in 31% of patents. As a result, women only represent 13% of all listed inventors in these findings, and they made an estimated contribution equivalent to only 10% of all patent application. Women are not participating at the same rate in different regions of the world. Latin America and the Caribbean is the all-time most inclusive region, but Asia shows a very impressive growth over the past 15 years, from the last to the second position in the world. In 2016-2020, women represented 22% of inventors in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 16.5% in Asia, down to between 12 and 14% on all other regions. This level of aggregation hides a lot of heterogeneity among the countries that form the region. So for each region, I picked the 5 countries that filled at least 90% of all PCT application and ranked them based on their women inventor rate. The bars are the volume for the most recent period, while the black diamonds are the value for the latest period, the oldest period, 2001-2005. Spain is first with 25% of women among inventors, followed by 4 Latino American countries, and they are all above 20% of women among inventors. And one of the reasons also for countries to be ranked in this order is their technological specialization. So countries that are more specialized, for instance, in the mechanical industry, will be ranked less well than countries that are specialized in biotechnology, for instance. So the following graph shows the women inventor rate in each class, each technological class. And the rates are typically higher all over regions of the world among the chemistry field, so the purple bars, and lower among the mechanical engineering field, which are the green bars. The fields that are related to some extent to digital innovation are rather in the middle of the ranking. So it's not a perfect mapping, but if we want a rough idea, digital communication, medical technologies, IT method for management, they're all in the middle of the graph. And that's a very consistent pattern across regions of the world. In this figure, we're computing an index that was published by Delgado and her colleague last year that accounts for the technological specialization of countries as compared to the world. So we rank again the country, and we see that there are moving ranks along the graph, but not enough to cross the world average, which means that industrial specialization is actually not the main driver of the gender gap in patenting. Another possible reasons for a country to display higher or lower rate of women's participation in patenting is the relative contribution of academia as compared to the private sector. So the number at the global level clearly show that academia, university, research organization are on average higher than company and individual ownership. And what's interesting is that this divide is actually very neat in some region like Africa, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, which is a very good example, and even Oceania, but it's much less pronounced in Northern America and even almost insignificant in Asia. Bouncing back to the point I made when comparing the different metrics, we find that women take part in inventive teams differently from men. So here we're plotting the percentage of patents that are filled by different team composition in terms of gender and size. And the first takeaway is that women are tend to work on their own, so the dark blue area at the bottom, more frequently than they work in all-women team, the thin black line in between, or even in mostly women team, the pink area. The second takeaway is that the rise in women's participation is driven by mostly men team, so the orange area, few women, lots of men, and to some extent gender balanced team, the yellow area. And finally, the decrease in invention by single men inventors, so the light blue area at the top, explains most of the rise in women participation in patenting. So what's next for us? First, we're about to publish, it's a matter of days now, this finding in a forthcoming development study report on WIPO website. Then on the gender gap in patenting topic, we keep investigating. Why is it that some countries are faring better than others? What is it that they are doing well, and can it be replicated in other countries? Also, the research shows that family formation and motherhood are definitely two key mechanisms through which women's career is hampered. So we would like to investigate how family-friendly policies, such as those that are affecting the cost and the availability of daycare facilities, affect women participation in patenting. And beyond this topic, we also want to broaden our perspective to produce statistics on other form of diversity, race, ethnicity, income, but also more importantly, we are producing the statistics of the gender gap in other forms of IP. In particular, we're working on design at the time. And finally, in parallel of all this research, we are also organizing a series of online seminars that are covering each region of the world. In the first panel, we have policymakers discussing the different policies and action that they have in place to address gender inequality in IP. And in the second panel, we have economists and statisticians presenting the numbers for their country and the different trends. The goal of this series is to raise awareness, but also to provide greater knowledge of member states' effort in closing the IP gender gap. All the recordings are actually available on these links on our website. So we already covered the Americas, the European region, and then the Asia Pacific recently. And we're organizing the last event for the Africa and Arab region on May 31 and June 1st. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elodie. I was hoping you would continue. This is great. Also really interesting to see about the seminar series. And I'm actually very much looking forward to looking at the recordings. So thank you so much. I know, at least for me, this is a topic that I'm not very familiar with, and it's very interesting to see the gender gaps and to really try to suss out what's going on here, what's behind this, and how can we develop policies that can address this. So thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. And I'm sure we will start getting a few questions as well in the chat. So please feel free to jump on the chat and answer any of those as they come in. We will have a little bit of time at the end for questions, but I just want to make sure that everyone gets all of their questions answered. Okay, so next we will go to our presentation on online gender-based violence and digital inclusivity by Eva Sever, who is who is a senior monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning specialist for the Global Network and Regional Engagement team at Vital Voices, where she's providing technical assistance for the Urgent Assistance Fund and other programming under the Voices Against Violence initiative. So Eva, please, you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Heather. Hello, everyone. It's very exciting to be here with like-minded colleagues. So I will take this opportunity to go over what Vital Voices is doing in their programming to really look at gender and how programming, project design, and program design can be looked through that lens. I think a lot of our presenters kind of walked us through today, and folks who have been attending CSW events already know that our achievement of SDGs are unfortunately quite bleak, but I see this as an opportunity to introduce you some organizations and some programs that are actually designing their outcomes and their impacts so that we assure that we can reach those SDG goals. Vital Voices itself is focusing on SDG 5, especially through gender-based violence initiatives. However, we do understand that the SDGs are quite complex and they're interrelated. So from our point of view, we think that investment should go into new ways of leadership. We would like to see women in leadership positions, and we know that when women lead, they lead differently. So on your screens, you're seeing the mission of Vital Voices, but we acknowledge that women are key to progress in their communities, and nations cannot move forward without women in leadership positions. And in order to ensure that, we have a holistic investment model that focuses on women leaders. We provide financial stability and security to women leaders through grants that we provide. We make sure that all of our women leaders are connected to other network members in our communities. And we also give them leadership journeys, leadership training called the Vital Voices Leadership Journey, just to make sure holistically that they're supported and that woman leader has a vision, and we help them to bring that vision to life. And you can see since the inception of the organization, we have directly invested in over 20,000 women across 184 countries and territories. Slight technical difficulty trying to change my slides here. Perhaps, Asha, I can ask some help from you and you can maybe share.
Yes, happy
Thanks,
to.
Stephanie. Thank you
Give
so
me
much.
1 second.
Apologies, everyone. I can stop sharing, Asha, if it's easier for you. Tends to happen in online events, so.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All right. Are you seeing this correctly?
Yes, we can start from the second slide. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So apologies again, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us during that time. So I want to kind of talk over what programs we implement. Basically, we work with a lot of women leaders who either are trying to end violence, who are trying to create economic inclusivity when it comes to women or genders in general, and also some climate justice there as well. There's a lot of other programming that we do, but I do want to highlight our programming in gender-based violence and economic inclusivity today. We ask our women leaders, once they are connected to our networks and once they're connected to our resources, to pay this forward to their communities. So if they are invested in a leadership journey with us, if they are getting grants from our end, we do want to see them take that knowledge and skill set and reflect it to their communities, reflect it to their governments as much as possible. And our women leaders actually have communicated directly to their communities, shared their knowledge on trainings, been part of speaking events, and have reached out to 163,000 people. And with some of the products that they have developed, which I will give examples, they've actually reached 1.9 million people, which is very exciting on our end. We can move on to the next slide.
Uh-oh.
There
I might
seems
be
to be
having
some
issues
type
as
of
well.
difficulty, isn't there? That is completely
Oh, there we
fine.
go.
Oh, there you go. Great. With this being said, I'd like to focus on our Voices Against Violence initiative. The Voices Against Violence initiative is a public-private partnership that is led by Vital Voices, and it aims to give holistic support to extreme forms of GBV survivors. So extreme forms of GBV is something that I'd like to underline. And you can see the objectives there. We basically want to make sure that GBV survivors have increased access to resources. We want to make sure that they have improved protections and access to justice. And we do want to expand our international network. You can see there we have on the bottom of the slide our consortium partners, CARE, Ecumundo, and Global Fund for Women, which are all organizations in the gender-based violence area, either doing research, doing direct services, GBV provision services, so that they're all in our community and we can talk about gender-based violence on an international scale, talk about resources available, and talk about coordination and collaboration possibilities. Through our gender-based violence program, since the initial seeds of this program, we've been able to reach over 3,500 GBV survivors directly, and through our indirect support with organizational capacity development, especially for organizations who are direct service providers for GBV survivors, we've reached to over 31,000 beneficiaries. I'm hoping the slide can change now. And there
we go.
Some technical issues going on there. In this particular slide, I want to give a little bit more of our approach when it comes to gender-based violence and how we're tracking our gender-based violence data while putting the gender-based violence survivor, the survivor at its core of everything. So bringing the human experience first, and then trying to understand what our data is telling us. So our approach is, by definition, we give emergency assistance to survivors that are under acute and recent active immediate threats. Emergency assistance consists of medical support, relocation support, livelihood support, legal support, or psychosocial services. We can give this emergency assistance directly to the individual survivor, or we can give it through what we call referring organizations. These could be faith-based organizations, CSOs, civil society organizations, or other service providers in the area. And all of our funds are directly given to the survivors. We make sure that the survivors are the ones who have the power to decide how they want to use this emergency assistance, because we believe they know best their needs. So basically, we have a very survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach. However, data is very important for us to better our programs, to make sure that we're reaching SDG goals as much as possible. So you can see here, and I think from Jeanette's presentation, we're kind of on trend there, but majority of our cases come from the sub-Saharan Africa region. So that's over 60% of our cases. And then it's followed by our South Central Asia region. We make sure that we have disaggregations in our GBV data, disaggregations such as type of violence, disaggregations such as gender itself, as well as disaggregations that I haven't put there, but country of violent event to see regional trends, as well as religious ethnic minority disaggregations as well, because we understand that gender-based violence is a very specific experience that unfortunately survivors go through, and there is a need to disaggregate our services to meet their needs. I'm crossing my fingers. There you go. Amazing. So through our gender lens, we also keep track of survivors that might be identifying in different genders. So we never saw gender as a binary while designing this program itself. So we do have some numbers there, as you can see as well. For example, 130 survivors have identified as lesbians, 33 survivors have identified as gay. We have 12 survivors identifying as bisexual, 8 survivors identifying or sharing with us that they're still thinking about their sexual identity, and 6 survivors identifying as queer. But we are seeing that through our pool of survivors we have supported, we do not get enough gender data. And we do realize that this is because of lack of secureness, sense of safety, thinking that sharing their gender may possibly hinder the support that they're going to get. So with this being said, I want to introduce you to one of our network women who works in the area of gender-based violence data and incident reporting, and share a bit of her story in the next slide. So this lovely woman that you're seeing on your screen is Elsa Demarie Silva. She has been a Vital Voices Women leader, a network member for very long, and she is the founder of Safe City through her organization, Red Dots. So basically, what Elsa and her team were able to realize was, due to silence that surrounds sexual and gender-based violence and the sociocultural taboos, there is a gap in data. Not a lot of people want to come forward with their stories. Not a lot of people want to make sure that perpetrators are responsible, make sure that their government is taking care of survivors as they need to. So what they've created through crowdsourced mapping is Safe City app, which is an app that you can use to anonymously report sexual or gender-based violence incidents you might have experienced in a particular city of a country. This initiative started in India, firstly, but through her connections, Vital Voices was able to provide. Also worked with 15 network members, making sure that this application was actually transferred to countries like US, Canada, Brazil, and Australia, as you can see there. So through her impact, she was actually able to help over 1 million people to break their silence and to drive accountability in their communities. And lastly, I want to share a bit of our economic inclusivity and technological solution parallels in our next slide, hopefully. With our work on the Google Impact Challenge. So Vital Voices teamed with Google.org when Google.org actually gave 25 million of funds to organizations that are creating pathways to prosperity for women and girls. In 2021, Vital Voices partnered with Google for this particular project. And we actually, over 8,000 applications came our way. And we were able to select some charitable initiatives, helping women and girls turn their economic potential to power. So we landed on 34 organizations from 19 countries that would be part of this program, but I would like to highlight 3 of them. One is Reprogramma, as you can see. This is a nonprofit organization that offers online coding, online boot camps, hackathons, targeting Black and transgender women in Brazil, knowing that transgender and Black women are least represented in Brazil. This is important work to highlight, and we're very proud of the partnership. You can see with Refugee, this is also an organization addressing the lack of economic opportunity for refugee women in urban Kenya. Through our partnership with Refugee, we were also able to introduce refugees in Kenya to the online freelance economy to make sure that they are connected resource-wise there. And lastly, you can see Swatalim and our partner Humane Warriors working in India, making sure that girls aged 10 and 14 from the lower castes of India actually have access to education through voice response systems that require no internet, but they could still listen to modules of math, science, or any type of other education, so they're not left out of the school environment. So these are a bit of our efforts in trying to bridge these gaps and challenges. And thank you so much for listening, and apologies again for that technical issue.
Thank you so much, Eva. No, it was fine. No stress at all. Thank you so much for such a very interesting presentation. And it's so great to see all of the initiatives around the world. I mean, it just, I don't know, for me, it just like hits your heart that we need so much of this. And so, you know, I know we have very little time left, and I just want to thank all of the panelists for already answering a lot of questions in the Q&A panel that we have as well. But with the last couple minutes that we have, I guess I would just like to ask, and I'll start with Eva because I know she has to go soon, but you know, just for some of your your closing thoughts that you would like to leave with all of the participants here, or any of the calls to action that you would really like to focus on.
I appreciate that opportunity. I think what I would like to leave everyone with is we are in this decade of digital transformation. We're talking about a lot of important stuff. We're talking about data gaps. I think it's important to use data for the good purpose. Sometimes rather than filling in requirements or checking boxes, I think we should also use data to better programs, to make sure that we understand the needs of women, the needs of vulnerable women, because these are all compounded challenges, are addressed through all of the research that we presented here, through Jeanette's wonderful presentation, Elodie's wonderful presentation, to make sure that we really programmatically make sense of that data, change our designs and decision-making, basically.
Thank you so much. And I think there is also a question addressed to you in the chat about connecting with your organization. Do you have any advice on how to do that?
Definitely. And I also saw that chat and was about to write in the chat as well. I'm very happy to connect with anyone in our audience who is doing gender-based violence work, who is doing direct service provision, and definitely connect you with our colleagues on our side in our department to see what type of partnerships we can have, because I know this is a very resource scarce topic, and we are here to make those connections happen.
Thank you so much, Ella. Next, Elodie, I just wanted to give you the opportunity for any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us. And I actually had a question as well about women who are developing patents. I mean, do you get to talk to them and kind of question them on you know, their space or their participation in this space as well?
Not so much, sadly. I had opportunity to speak with the lawyers who are filing the patent of women, with different activists, with different groups, but not so much with women inventors. That's really something I'd like to be able to do. So if there are any women inventor who hear me right now, please reach out. I'd love to hear your adventure, but there are not so many, as you could see, there are not so many women inventors, and so that's not a very broad population we're talking about. But any last thought? I'm a data person, so I definitely agree with Eda that we need to use data for the greater good. And we're doing our best in our team to get the most information from the data, but you know, data cannot be accessed if we don't have the right policy behind. So at the same time, I would like to push for more access to information on the gender of women, on the demographics of inventors, and of any study that we try to do. So that's my key message. Please give us access to data.
Thank you so much, Elodie. Jeanette, I will pass it to you. Thank you so much, actually, for answering so many questions in the chat. If you have any last thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we close.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with the other panelists. It's really about making that data available, making sure that we're not leaving folks behind when we collect this information, so that we bring visibility to the challenges and barriers that different groups of women are facing. So really expanding the diversity of data that we have available to us and making sure that we use it. Data is only powerful if it's used to inform policy, to inform social change, and to improve people's lives. We don't collect it just for the sake of collecting. That's not, you know, I think Heather's nodding her head, you know, we're not looking at these numbers just because we want to look at numbers. We want to, you know, try to find insights from these numbers that can inform, you know, some of the changes that we want in society. The other thing, a lot of the questions in the chat were about, you know, what progress has been made. Is the story so bleak? And I think that, you know, one of the things that we struggled, you know, Heather, Ancha, many folks in a few of the team members are here. Worked on it. One of the things that we struggled was that the story was so bleak, right? That when we looked at, you know, what the trajectory was for addressing, you know, just simply looking at the laws and addressing kind of the discrimination in laws, it was going to take, you know, centuries. So we really want to, you know, convey that message. And I think we're sometimes afraid to say that, but I think we do. We have to say progress has been too slow. Progress has been too erratic. And we want change and we want it now. And part of that is also advocating for really policy action that, as I said, is sustained over time. Oftentimes, you know, these reports come out, there's a flurry of action, you know, let's do a 1-year program here, a 2-year program here, and then all of a sudden, you know, silence. And the challenges are so large and, you know, really rooted in very entrenched kind of gender-based discrimination that they're not going to be solved overnight. And so let's be honest about that. And then let's have an honest plan of action that says these challenges are complex, they're interrelated, and we need a comprehensive package that recognizes this and that recognizes that it's going to take multiple years of work to really bring about transformational change. And that's really what we want, transformational change. Over.
No, thank you so much. I mean, it's the running current of the 2030 agenda is that these are massive, massive problems that require transformational change across the SDGs. And we know fundamentally we need SDG 5 to get there. We know this. And so we have to do the work to get there. So I just want to thank all of our panelists for all of your very insightful presentations and comments and answers to the questions. We do have a few more. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can on the actual chat, but I'd like to thank everyone for your participation today, also to our panelists, and wishing everyone a lovely commission and a lovely week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.